All right, the recording has started.
All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Ethics and Election Committee meeting. Here today is the 23rd of September. It's about 1 minute after noon. And I guess we could take some roll call if see all who's here.
Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to do that if you like.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Kennedy?
For introduction.
Here. Mr. Dunbar? Ms. Allard?
Mr. Dunbar indicated that he was working on a project and would be either late or wouldn't be able to join.
Okay.
Ms. Allard? I don't see her listed. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Here.
And Mr. Peterson?
Present. Well, I think we do have a quorum.
3 out of 5.
All right. Well, we can go to the first item under new business. We'll do some talking about email voting. I actually did a little Googled email voting today just to see how many other states have email voting. It says 32 states and the District of Columbia do allow email voting, but the vast majority of email votes are cast by military members and their dependents. There are some jurisdictions that are experimenting with more different types of email voting. So I think if we were able to figure out how to do this safely, we would be joining a group of other states and jurisdictions that are planning to try to use technology to increase voter turnout. But if anyone else has any information about email voting, is there a report that someone has, Ms. McConnell or Ms. Jones?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do have a short report.
Okay.
Personal lobby. Thank you. Okay. Email and fax voting was added to municipal code in 2004. And elections is aware of issues with email and fax voting. We had both a cybersecurity audit done by the municipality IT and an audit from the Center for Election Innovation. And they both flagged email voting as a security concern. During the amendments that the Assembly considered at the beginning of 2020, I think it was back in January or February, there were concerns raised about the security of email voting, but because applications to vote by email had already been accepted for the 2020 election, the Assembly agreed to continue to allow email voting, but they also decided to revisit the issue afterwards. So this is sort of the beginning of that process. Looking back just the past 3 years, so 2018, 2019, and 2020, we have never had more than about a little over 400 applications to vote by email. It was the highest number of applications was in 2018, that reduced in 2019, but increased again in 2020 to 144% over 2019, a total of 255 applications received. And we attribute that to the pandemic and people's travel plans being interrupted and that sort of thing. I also did some research into other communities. I did not do a comprehensive review of all states, but I did want to share some information that jives with what you were saying earlier, Mr. Chair. The state of Alaska allows voters to receive ballots by email or fax or delivery through a website, but they must be returned by mail or fax. They do not allow the return of voted ballots by email. A variety of states, and I looked at Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and Montana, They limit email voting only to the military and overseas voters. Some of them do allow the return of voted ballots by email, but some of them limit email only to delivery of unvoted ballots and then require the voted ballot to be returned by fax or mail. And that is also true in various counties in San Francisco, that they will allow delivery of the ballot by email or through some sort of online system, but then the ballot has to be printed and returned by mail or Dropbox. We do have certain acknowledgement requirements in our code. When a voter requests a ballot by fax or email, they must sign an acknowledgement that a marked or unmarked ballot sent by facsimile or electronics transmission is less secure than a ballot cast by mail or in person, and that they accept that risk. And then the returned ballot includes a declaration that says, I understand that by using electronic transmission to return my marked ballot, I am voluntarily waiving a portion of my right to secret ballot to the extent necessary to process my ballot, but expect that my vote will be held as confidential as possible. In the 2020 election, we were not aware of any voters who had a problem returning their ballot by either fax or mail. Any voter who requests and is sent a ballot by fax or email, they must print and hand sign the voter declaration that accompanies the ballot. So every voter who requests a ballot in that manner has to have access to a printer. Because of the variety of concerns of voting by email, sending ballots back by email, and sort of looking at the way other states do it, we do have a recommendation, and we recommend that the option of returning a voted ballot by email be limited to the military and overseas voters. And I just want to clarify, those are active duty deployed military and their families. So people, military members who are overseas. And that we retain the ability to send ballots to voters by fax or email. But if you're not an overseas voter, you would then have to return the ballot by fax or email.
Okay. Yeah, there's the Uniformed Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act that passed several years ago by Congress that allows military people to vote via email from the front lines and people who are assigned to remote areas. So any comments or questions about email voting?
Mr. Chair, I have a question. This is Crystal.
Okay, Crystal. Ms. Kennedy, go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. My question, I guess, is just in regard to limiting it to military. And the only reason why I say that is I can think of specifically, my husband and I were due to be on a trip, probably about a month-long trip in next month. Of course, we canceled it. We planned this trip 2 years ago and canceled it before all this COVID stuff got going. But anyway, we would have actually been overseas for about a month prior to the election, and including the date of the election. So anyway, I can see where it would have been an advantage for us to be able to get an email ballot and then print it out, fill it out, and then mail it from somewhere in Europe. So I'm just wondering, I mean, I certainly want to include the military in that, but I can also see where there are other circumstances where other people who just happen to be traveling might need to do the same thing. So was there a discussion about why it would only be limited to military?
Through the chair, Ms. Kennedy, the situation you just described would still be permitted. So we're still proposing that any voter can receive a blank ballot by email but that only the military and overseas, these UOCAVA voters, would be permitted to return a voted ballot by email. So if you were traveling, like you just gave an example, and you got your email or you got your ballot by email, you print it, you vote it, and you put it in the mail, that would still be permitted.
Okay, thank you. And I have another question, Mr. Chair.
Continue, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. My other question is, when somebody gets an email ballot, what keeps them from making multiple copies of that particular ballot? And how would we try to safeguard that?
Through the chair, Ms. Kennedy, that's an excellent question. There is nothing that prevents them from making multiple copies, but when we get a voted ballot back, it has to be accompanied by, so if we get it back through the email, it has to be accompanied by the voter declaration of the voter who requested it. So we're checking that the person who sent it back is somebody who requested an email ballot, that their ballot ID number matches the ballot ID number that we sent to them, and that their signature matches. So, and then if they send it back by the mail, it's the same thing. They have the same voter declaration. We're checking the same thing. So if they were to make multiple copies and distribute it to lots of other people, and those people sent them back to us, those, I don't know how to describe them, those ballots that were just copied and sent back, they wouldn't be tied to a voter, they wouldn't be tied to a ballot ID number. And so we would be able to tell that those were not official ballots, and we wouldn't count them.
Right.
Okay, thank you. That helps. So typically that means that they would be processed how any absentee ballot is processed.
That's correct.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. And I wanted to note that Ms. Allard has joined us, and Ms. Quinn Davidson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought Crystal's questions were helpful, but I didn't understand the answer. So why, Erica, can you talk about why, if you're military, you could email it back, but for others, they'd have to send it in the mail? What's the justification for, I mean, it seems like whoever votes overseas should have the same system for sending it back.
So the proposal is that what are called UOCAVA voters would be able to return voted ballots by email. And that is defined as members of the uniformed services on active duty and the merchant marine who, because of their membership in the service, are absent from their place of residence and are otherwise qualified to vote. 2, the spouses and dependents of these uniformed services voters who are absent due to the member's active duty or service. And 3, qualified voters who reside outside of the United States. So it isn't just military, it's also people who choose to live in a foreign country. The concern is that there are concerns with having voted ballots returned by email. And so, but what we're proposing is a little carve out for the overseas people because the mail can take such a long time for them. Did that answer your question?
Not really. May I follow up, Mr. Chair?
Continue, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you. So I appreciate the clarification that anyone living overseas, irrespective of the reason, can return a vote by email. But like in Crystal's example, say she was going to Italy for 2 months. I don't know if that's where you were going, Crystal, but that would be fun. And why couldn't I just don't understand why she would have to find, I mean, someone being there temporarily, it would theoretically be even harder for them to navigate like the mail system than someone who's living there permanently. So I guess I don't support, unless you can really justify it, a different system for different people returning ballots. That seems inequitable to me. And I don't understand the reason for it.
I see Miss Jones has her hand up. Maybe
Thank-
she has some ideas on this subject. Ms. Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Quinn Davidson, I think we sort of started in the middle of this conversation. Erica did mention that there had been some concerns, but some of you may not remember. IT showed up at your work session on our ordinance and said they could not support email voting, and that email voting was a potential for fraud. And here are the reasons for that. Number one, it's fraud and security. So it's two types. First of all, when people have to scan the PDF of their voted ballot or take a picture of it, most people just take a JPEG photo of the voted ballot and put that back in an email to us, the potential for changing the votes on that ballot on a PDF document are higher than the potential for changing a ballot that's in the mail. So that's the one risk. Now, the opposite answer to that is, as Erica said, we have so few email voters. The risk is still low. So that's one part of the security fraud issue. The second part, Austin, is that PDFs potentially could contain viruses. And so oftentimes the MOA IT department strips those documents from the emails. And so either we don't receive them or we receive them without the attachment because they're considered dangerous. And you know, when you get those emails that says this attachment isn't included or don't open this unless you know blah, blah, blah. And so in response to that argument, there are some options. One, could we do a safe list that says to IT, we're emailing ballots out to these 144 people and they're safe, so please let their emails come back. Or we did what we did this year and said the voter had to sign a declaration that said, I know my ballot could get not received by the MOA. So those are the things we did. So this presentation is in response to those security concerns. And we were told to bring this back to the committee. And this is entirely up to you. We're working on the Title 28 updates, and we wanted to have a separate discussion about email and fax voting and get your input before we present those changes to the body as a whole.
May I follow up one more time, Mr. Chair?
Okay, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you. So, Barbara, you spoke about why email voting is not preferable. I don't disagree with that. My specific question, which I still feel has not been answered, is why would we create an inequitable system where some people vote in a different way? Some people overseas return their ballots in a different way than other people overseas. I just don't think it's smart for us to be doing that. I mean, I don't know if there are legal issues or not, but it feels bad. It feels wrong. And so I guess I would not support that.
Got it. Okay, so Austin, the answer to that question is that in our look at other jurisdictions, that is what they do. They do carve out, and there is the federal carve out for UOCAVA voters. And so we are just throwing that out as an option.
Interesting. Okay. I see Jamie has a question, so I'll defer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Ms. Allard?
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I actually, I agree with Austin partly, but then there's the other carve out. And I would like to address the carve out as a veteran and a spouse of someone who was in the military for 30 plus years. There is a federal guideline. And when somebody is in a combat zone, they can't print and find a stamp. And so sometimes the only way those military service members can vote is by, which I'm still weary of internet voting and being able to do it via email. But these folks are over there serving their country. And I think that's where I am supportive of not taking that away from our military members. But I do understand Ms. Quinn Davidson addressing being equal across the board. But I do know there is a little bit of a special leniency there for our military men and women. And I hope, Austin, you would maybe consider supporting it based on our military members when they're in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Bosnia, or Kyrgyzstan or Uzbekistan or those type of locations. We can't always get to a stamp, printer, and a mailbox. So that's all I have to say. So if it is carved out only for the UCABA, as we said, then I would support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Any additional questions or comments about email voting?
I guess I could just add, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind,
Go ahead, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
that I absolutely agree with Jamie. So I would not support taking away the right of the military to vote by email. I'm just thinking it makes sense to give that to everyone. But I think you guys understand my position. So anyway, I just want to make that clear. I totally agree with Jamie. Like if we had to pick a group, that's the group I'd want to give it to. But I just don't see why we couldn't be more broad and allow everyone to do that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is in terms of what happens if we detect some kind of fraud going on. And I guess I'm looking at the whole legal implications to that in terms of the integrity of the vote as a whole. If somebody is hacking into the system and they have corrupted a PDF or whatever, can we actually track that by ballot? Or would the result be such that it would throw the entire election result? So what kind of remedy or what kind of parameters, what do we have in place? What kind of tools do we have to actually keep the potential of that from actually having the whole entire vote discredited?
I think Ms. Jones might have a response for that.
First of all, Ms. Kennedy, I would say that is a question for IT. And it is a big question, but it is really a question for them. Because remember, we use the municipality of Anchorage, the Outlook, or that is where email comes from. So those questions are for them. And they have reviewed all of our system down at the election center. So I think that specific question it really needs to be directed to them. And I think because you're talking about how it would come into the system, right?
Well, I'm thinking more in terms of the result. If that happens to if that does happen, if somebody has somehow hacked into the system, they've created false ballots, or they've sent in false ballots. I mean, I know you have a way when things come in through the mail to actually track that, and you can monitor that, and you know when somebody has basically submitted a fraudulent ballot. But in terms of how something can get intercepted, and you're right, it's an IT question, I guess. But what I'm trying to figure out is if somebody corrupts the system somehow and a faulty ballot or an altered ballot comes through the internet, can we track that to the point where we can stop it from being counted? Or what is this something that's going to show up somewhere down the road and we've already counted the ballot and now we basically have an election that could be declared fraudulent. In other words, it would basically impact the integrity of the entire vote.
Okay, so Ms.
The
Kennedy, I'm going to give you 3 answers to that question. Okay, so number 1, your question is for IT about the, getting into the system. Number 2, remember that the rest of the system is not connected to email. So even if one email vote is hacked, it's not the rest of the election system. It's not the signature verification system. It is not the tabulation system. They are totally separate. There is no connection between those. All right. So, and Erica explained that, each email vote has to be connected. So we're talking about potentially this year, 144, well, maybe it was 200 ballots total anyway. And those ballots are connected to, we know who voted by email. So the third question is really a legal question, but I'm going to throw this out to you, is that we were working on our Title 28 amendments yesterday. And of course, if you can tell how someone voted, like, for example, let's say that and it's not someone, it's how a ballot was marked. Let's say that we have a ballot that was marked for a write-in, and I'm just going to make up Ernie Hall. And on the candidate form, the person didn't color in the oval for Ernie Hall, but they colored in the write-in and wrote Ernie Hall. In a challenge or an election contest, our system doesn't count that write-in for Ernie Hall. It doesn't count write-ins unless the write-in exceeds the highest number of vote getters. So in an election contest, we could be told, oh no, you do need to count that for Ernie Hall. And we would, because we would be able to count that vote for Ernie Hall. Now, there's other situations where we could not tell who the vote went to or should have gone to. And in probably about 2013, there was an error at a polling location. And while Mayor Sullivan was in office and Dennis Wheeler was the municipal attorney, and Dennis mentioned this yesterday, that there's a proportional reduction. The law has a proportional reduction or addition to votes. And I do not know how that works, but that's how it would work. And we can get more information for you. If you want us to follow up on the email voting, we can have, Dean will be back before your next meeting, and we can report to you from IT. We need to know how to proceed because IT is going to want to be involved in this. And then we can have one of the lawyers talk to you about how that would affect the election. But I want to assure you, a changed ballot in this circumstance would not infect the rest of the systems or change it more than just the votes on that single ballot.
Right.
Okay, I think you answered my question. Yeah, because my concern was from the legal aspect of it. Could one faulty ballot basically negate the entire election? In other words, could legally a court say that's an invalid election? You have to have the election over again because of a ballot that might have been tampered with somewhere in cyberspace before it actually got to the place where it was counted. So anyway, so I think you're telling me no.
Yes.
So anyway, okay.
I will couch my response again, Ms. Kennedy, and say, I think no, you are correct. but I will leave that up to the lawyers to confirm that for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. And, you know, we've discussed this on a couple occasions in the past, that one of the most important, if not the most important thing, is to maintain the integrity of our election system. And so that's why we've got it set up the way we have it set up down at the election center. And so far it's worked fairly well, I would have to say, and hopefully that'll continue to be effective going forward. Only additional thing I can think of that about email voting is that I noticed that I saw an article that Utah, the state of Utah, allows disabled voters to return their ballots via email, which is slightly different than some of the other states, but that is something that I suppose we could consider as well, as long as we are making changes to the code. But any other questions or comments about email voting before we go on to our next item? Not seeing any. Let's go to new business item B, the Title 28 amendments. And do you have an update for us about that, Ms. Jones?
Actually, Mr. Chair, Erica has been leading the team through this effort, and she is going to show you what we have done so far. We're just going to give you a partial update because it's a little too much for a full meeting.
Okay.
And actually, Mr. Chair, I was going to suggest if we wanted to run quickly through our old business to make sure we get to it, and then we could spend the rest of the hour looking at the Title 28 amendments.
Okay, we could change the order of the day. I have no problem with that. So do we have a report from the drafting work group about charter changes?
At this time, we do not. We are still tossing around some ideas. So we'll either bring that to the committee next month or the month after that, but we're still working on that issue.
Okay. All right, well, let's go to the date of the runoff election then.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The ordinance that changes the date of the runoff election to be consistent with the municipal charter is on your agenda for introduction next week on the 29th. There are two public hearings scheduled for October 13th and October 27th, and there's been a work session scheduled. I want to say it's for October 16th, but I don't. Is that correct?
Is correct. Yes.
Okay. And so a full work session scheduled for the 16th. So that is moving forward. And thank you to those of you who have signed on as co-sponsors.
You're welcome. Any questions or comments about the date of the runoff election? Not seeing any. Let's go to old business item C, the Juneau election.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ballots were mailed. I think it was about 27,000 ballots were mailed last week. So we have started the election. As of today, we have received 747 ballots back in the mail. So we've started processing and things are going smoothly.
Well, fantastic. So how many people do we have at the election center counting ballots right now?
Well, right now we only have our core staff because we are doing the sorting and the signature verification. We're not going to start envelope opening until much closer to the actual date of the election, October 6th, because we don't want to start scanning until the Juneau clerk arrives in Anchorage on October 8th. So we will be bringing in a couple of election workers during the week of the 6th, but until then, everything will be managed just by the core staff.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Any questions or comments about the Juneau election information we just received? Not seeing any. I guess we can go back to the Title 28 amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to share my screen if Ms. Jones will
Stop.
take.
There you go.
Yep. So we have an initial draft that I wanted to walk you through a little bit. I want to be clear, this draft is still going through legal review. So in a sense, it is still conceptual. We're still working out issues and discussing changes, but we wanted to start walking through it with the committee so that you have a sense of what we're thinking about. So it's a long ordinance, but a lot of the changes are based on two issues. One is that we are changing the name of our vote centers from Accessible Vote Center to it'll just be Vote Center in the code. We'll probably call it Anchorage Vote Center in our publicity materials. And then the second major issue is that there's a lot of different envelopes. We have our return envelope, we have a question ballot envelope, we have a special needs ballot envelope. And so some of the changes are just trying to standardize the language for every time we reference those envelopes to make it consistent across the whole code. So you'll see a lot of length, but a lot of it is based on just those two issues. So here we've proposed modifying the clerks, the powers and duties of the municipal clerk. This just references language that is in Title 2 for what the clerk is responsible for in relation to elections. And then this second paragraph, the new paragraph B, is to clarify that if the clerk does have a suspicion that there is some sort of fraud or some sort of alleged election offense, that the clerk is authorized to gather information about that. And we're talking about information relating to what's here at the election center, information about voter registration, information about, the ballot envelope and that sort of thing, in order to determine whether there actually was an alleged election offense that needs to be reported to law enforcement.
Mr. Chair?
Did you have your hand up, Ms. Jones?
Yes. So to the members, I want you to know we think this addition to B is important. A couple of years ago, Ms. Demboski alerted us to a situation where someone on Facebook alleged that she had voted her roommate's ballots. And Ms. Demboski got us that Facebook post, and we looked up that person in the voter registration database and all of the people that lived at that address. And we flagged those and monitored to see if they voted. So when we reported this to the assembly in our certification report because it was an allegation of fraud, and we report every allegation of fraud to the assembly. When we talked to the municipal attorney at the time about it, she said, "You are not authorized to do that. You have to call APD." And my concern is that it wouldn't make any sense to call APD and say this allegation is on Facebook, and then APD has to come to the election center and then do what? I think there was a dispute among the attorneys, and one attorney said, well, of course the clerk can do this. So in any event, the current municipal attorney is satisfied with this language, and it's recommended by Dennis Wheeler, who is our project manager and the former municipal attorney. And so we think that this is a better way to prohibit fraud, is that we have the ability to gather the information, stop or check someone who's voting if an allegation is made. So that, and then turn it over to law enforcement. We're not gonna, like Erica said, we're not going outside of the election center. We're just gonna get our information together and provide it to law enforcement.
Okay. Any questions? All right, I guess we can continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next section is definitions. And because we've taken out the word accessible from the definition of accessible vote center, the definition moves to the V section of the alphabet. So you'll see it lower down on these pages. So we haven't deleted the definition, it's just been moved. Here in the definition of ballot, we have taken out what is essentially a directive to the clerk and moved it to a different place in code because it's one doesn't look for directives on what to do in the definitions. We have some minor changes in some of these other definitions. We've added some new definitions for clarity. The ballot package, the ballot return envelope, what is a challenged ballot, what is a facsimile ballot. Here we have our, we call it the Muokava voter because we added the word municipal in front of Uokava, but it's the Municipal Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act voter. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but this is the definition that I read to you earlier. And we have this in here not related to email voting, but we can certainly use this if that's the direction that we're given on moving forward with email voting. And I can't tell if somebody wants to ask a question, so please just interrupt me if there are questions.
Can I interrupt?
Oh, okay, go ahead, Ms. Allard.
Okay, thank you. So I was wondering, you kind of scrolled past it, and it was in regards to the envelopes. Is it accurate? Are they on the outside of the envelopes? Does it say whether somebody is voting as Democrat or Republican? Can you clarify that for me?
No, that is not on the outside of the envelope. It's not on the inside of the envelope. And because municipal elections are nonpartisan, we don't have any information relating to a person's, I mean, we can see it in the state's voter registration database, but we don't deal with it at all about anybody's party affiliation.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Observer, this is a person who has signed an oath to keep voter information confidential and is able to more closely watch the operations of the election. Preliminarily rejected ballot, question ballot, envelope, secrecy.
Erica, I'd just like to point out that recently, our most recent observer was Debbie Oshander from Eagle River. She signed the Observer Confidential Handbook, did the little training with me. So she was an observer and got to watch the confidential operations on the recount on Proposition 1. So we have used that recently.
Thank you. So here we again have our definition of vote center. And then here under voter declaration, we are still discussing this internally, but right now it talks about under penalty of perjury, and perjury is a Class B felony in state law, and unsworn falsification is a Class A misdemeanor, which is defined in municipal code. So it's my understanding that the municipality can only enforce against misdemeanor violations in our own laws. And so this sort of makes it more clear that we would be enforcing against somebody who commits unsworn falsification. But again, this is something we're still talking about. Section 3 is about voter use of power of attorney. And for the most part, it changes the words electronic transmission to fax or email. Electronic transmission is a little vague, and I think your average citizen understands what fax and email are. So we're trying to make the language more accessible to the public, and we're trying to simplify some of this language so that a voter can have a power of attorney apply for a ballot. It doesn't really matter whether it's an absentee ballot or an email ballot, they can apply for a ballot. So some of this has been simplified a little bit. And we are also clarifying that a power of attorney, someone who holds a power of attorney cannot either vote the ballot for the voter, nor can they sign the voter declaration for the person for whom they have power of attorney. These changes are just removing the word accessible and simplifying number 7, just general instructions about options for voting rather than trying to list out the various options for voting. Here in section 5, we're removing language that references a nominating petition for a candidate. Nominating petition is a thing that doesn't exist in municipal code. It exists in state law, but does not apply to the municipality. So we are removing it as inapplicable. Here in section 6 on ballots, we are trying to clarify that under B, the number of ballots, we're talking about both printing and getting the state registration list, the timing of getting the state registration list, so we know how many people are registered to vote in the municipality for this election and who they are. Because of course the state's registration list is fluid. It can change all the time as people register to vote, they change their registration, or they request removal from the state registration list. So at some point we have to get that list, and then it becomes a static list for us to run our election. And so this is setting out the timeline for getting that list and the number of ballots that have to be prepared.
So the good thing about changing that list from 60 days to 25 days is it means we'll allow more people to be, it more accurately represents who is registered to vote for that election.
And another important reason for changing this number is that the Assembly has the authority to call a special election between 30 and 45 days in advance of the election. So if we're required to get the voter registration list 60 days in advance and we don't even know that there's going to be an election 60 days in advance, then that's a little bit of a problem. Although this is, this section A is only about poll-based elections, but should we have one of those in the future? Here under this paragraph C, we're proposing to rename it candidate order. Both sections of deleted text are listed here in D1A. The names of all candidates shall be on the ballot with spaces for write-in equal to the number of offices filled, the title of the office, and vote for no more than the number of the offices. So that was duplicative. And we're making this paragraph solely about how the candidate order is determined on the ballot, which we do through a drawing of Scrabble letters, which is happens, I think, in January, and that's always a fun thing.
Yeah.
And then here at the bottom, we've just tidied up some language about what is the difference between an official ballot and a sample ballot to provide more clarity, because it was a little bit confusing before. This next section is about preparation and distribution. This here in A is the language that was in the definition of ballot back up on page 2 that I told you was a directive that was removed from the definition. And then here is the requirement that each polling location, when you have a polling-based election, each polling location shall receive at least the number of ballots for at least 70% of the registered voters within the precinct served by that polling location. So this is the same concept that was listed above, but it was just listed in the wrong place. And here under voting by mail, here are two concepts about how you determine who gets a ballot. So of course, anyone who gets a ballot has to be qualified to vote under the section that sets up forth who's qualified. And then this number 2 is they can only be sent a ballot containing the races or questions on which the voter is authorized. So for instance, if you live in a LRSA, you get to vote on that LRSA, but if you don't live in the LRSA, you don't get to vote in that LRSA. So this is basically making sure that each voter gets the correct ballot style. Minor wording changes. This section removes the word accessible and just clarifies that this section is about vote centers, which it is. It's about appointing at least 2 election officials for each vote center. So the title wasn't really quite accurate. Vote center, removing the word accessible. Removing the word accessible in section 040 and 050. Section 070 and 080, they both talk about voters not on the official registration list or the voter registration database. So we are trying to combine those to basically say, if you're on the official registration list, you get to vote. If your identification shows a initials or a nickname or a common variant of a name that's on the official registration list, then you get to vote. So for instance, if your official registration says Elizabeth Smith, but your ID says Betty Smith, that's acceptable. That is not a reason to make a person vote a question ballot. Or if it says Richard J. Johnson and the ID is RJ, those are things that we accept. And this clarifies that and just moves it out of section 080 into section 070 and eliminates 080 as unnecessary. Here we've just updated our language. We don't have poll watchers anymore. We have observers. We don't use precincts. We use polling locations and removing the word accessible. And then also clarifying another reason that a person may be required to vote a question ballot is if in a poll-based election, they went to the wrong precinct or they went to the wrong polling location, their name isn't going to show up on the registration list at that polling location. And so they would need to either vote a question ballot or an area-wide ballot. This is some of that envelope language that I was mentioning. We have a ballot return envelope, question ballot envelope. In section 110, we're removing the word accessible. In section 120, we're standardizing our language, secrecy sleeve, removing accessible. Here under, this is C1, it says the municipality shall not accept ballots, collect on delivery, or in any other fashion that requires payment by the municipality in order to receive the envelope. We have discussed already in this committee that if a voter does not put a stamp on their envelope, but does put it in the mail, that the post office will deliver it to the election center and will charge the municipality for the price of the mailing of that ballot. And it's my understanding that that is a federal requirement. So we just added unless required by law to indicate that we have to accept ballots that come through the postal service that don't have a stamp, but we certainly wouldn't need to pay for a FedEx shipment or a UPS shipment if somebody sent us a ballot returned by FedEx without paying for it and expected us to pay for it. Removing the word accessible in 130 and 140. In section B, this is just a clarification of how to get a replacement ballot by mail or by delivery as a special needs voter. This paragraph number 2 talks about if a voter votes more than once. So if they get a replacement ballot and they return both their original and their replacement ballot, and this allows the clerk to determine that the clerk may wish to provide the voter's information to law enforcement, because intentionally voting twice is a election violation. Section 160 is just removing the word accessible, same for 170 and 190 and 200 and 210, that is both removing the word accessible and envelope language clarification. And then we have again here, the municipality shall not accept return envelopes, collect on delivery, or in any other fashion that requires payment unless required by law. Section 300 is about observers, and it looks like we're—
Is this a good place to stop?
Sure.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, we can stop. We're running low on time here, so if we could ask if there's any questions, because I see Crystal and Austin have to leave in a minute here. So, any questions? If not, I guess we could accept a motion to adjourn.
What about audience participation?
Audience participation. Okay, we've got a minute or so. Go ahead, Eugene.
Thank you very much. Start my timer. I'll be on subject quickly. I listened attentively to your presentations. Number one, by the way, my name is Ethan Carl Haberman. I follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, decisions made by the governing body is more like the public interest. Number one, the way many of your committees you have, I can go and look at the agendas and packets and stuff. But this committee, the semi-election committee, there is no place set up on the website for you to do that. You need to put that web connection there. And so I have been blinded as a member of the public to your discussion and materials that are before you, but not to the public. So it's extremely difficult to follow, not even agenda, no nothing. And you need to get that corrected with all due respect. And what's just very much distressing is you have addressed very substantial issues in this meeting without the paperwork for the public to see, and particularly items that you are going to send on for introduction for public hearing and then have a public hearing. So this has got to change, and you got to recognize that as far as those hearings that you scheduled because of this particular committee handled the process in this way, so forth. And then the last thing I'll say this is the discussion on the reference to fax and email and so forth, and who's getting it, who's not getting it, and the concern of technology. And as you know, I attend a lot of meetings over the years. This has been a concern, should be concerned by all of you and the public to make sure things are done right and nothing is damaging the integrity of the election. But there should be not an advantage to one party in one way of getting something and another way of another party, and you assigning the issue of military and doing it one way and forgetting about the rest of the community. That is not fair. and you need to have a fair process. And I'll close with that, and I look forward and wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. I'll accept the motion to adjourn. Or we'll just adjourn. We'll see you all next month.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.